Donald Trump's latest comments about Queen Elizabeth II have brought a fresh burst of attention to one of the most unusual relationships in modern royal diplomacy, the connection between the former monarch and the American president who became her final state visitor in the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth met Donald Trump on two major official occasions during his first presidency. The first came in July 2018 at Windsor Castle when the President and First Lady Melania Trump visited the UK and were received by the Queen. The second came in June 2019 during Trump's state visit to Britain, where he was formally welcomed with all the ceremony that comes with a full royal state occasion. That 2019 visit would later take on special historical significance because Trump became the last state visitor received by Queen Elizabeth in the UK before the pandemic changed the rhythm of royal diplomacy. State visits in 2020 and 2021 were heavily disrupted by COVID-19, and Queen Elizabeth's final years were shaped by lockdowns, health concerns, and the gradual slowing of public duties. So, when royal author Robert Hardman recently reflected on Trump's place in that timeline, it added a new and rather striking detail to the story. Hardman, who has written extensively about Queen Elizabeth II, recalled speaking to Trump in the Oval Office while discussing his new biography of the late Queen. According to Hardman, he told the president that he had been the last state visitor Queen Elizabeth ever received in the UK. Trump's first reaction was a joke. He asked, "I was the last? I hope I didn't do anything to offend her." NCT. It was a typically blunt, self-aware, slightly theatrical Trump response, and it immediately showed that he understood the significance of the moment. Hardman then reportedly told Trump that those close to the Queen had described her impression of him in surprisingly warm terms. According to the royal author, the late monarch found Trump charming, tall, tanned, big, courteous, mid-century, and amusing. That description is fascinating because it offers a glimpse of how Queen Elizabeth may have viewed him privately. The Queen met many American presidents across her reign, from Harry Truman to Joe Biden, and she had a lifetime of experience handling powerful, complicated, and sometimes unpredictable public figures. Trump's response to that description was short and unmistakably Trump. He reportedly said, "I've had better, and I've certainly had worse." That line is what made the exchange stand out. It was not a polished diplomatic answer. It was not the kind of carefully worded tribute usually offered when speaking about a late monarch. It was blunt, casual, and slightly humorous, but it also suggested that Trump saw the meeting as one among many high-profile encounters in his life, even while acknowledging the uniqueness of Queen Elizabeth's position. Still, Trump has often spoken positively about the late Queen. During and after his visits to the UK, he repeatedly expressed admiration for her, describing their meetings warmly and suggesting that they had good chemistry. His supporters often point to that as evidence of his respect for the monarchy, while critics argue that his style was always very different from the restraint and tradition associated with Queen Elizabeth. And that contrast is exactly why their meetings were so memorable. Queen Elizabeth represented continuity, discipline, and quiet authority. Trump represented disruption, personality, and political spectacle. When the two stood together, the image itself told a story about two very different kinds of power. One was inherited, ceremonial, and shaped by decades of restraint. The other was political, loud, and defined by directness. Yet, by most accounts, the meetings were cordial, and the Queen, who had spent her life mastering the art of polite diplomacy, appeared to handle the occasion with her usual composure. The fact that Trump was her last UK state visitor now gives that moment additional weight. At the time, no one could have fully understood that the 2019 visit would be the final one of its kind for Queen Elizabeth. State visits are designed to project continuity. They are full of carriages, banquets, guards of honor, speeches, and carefully choreographed symbolism. But looking back, that visit now sits near the closing chapter of the Queen's reign. It also shows how much royal diplomacy has changed since then. Queen Elizabeth is gone. King Charles is now on the throne. Trump has returned to the White House, and the relationship between Britain and America is once again being shaped not only by prime ministers and presidents, but by the soft power of monarchy. That became even clearer during King Charles and Queen Camilla's recent state visit to the United States. The visit received major attention, and Trump appeared deeply impressed by the royal couple. In fact, shortly after the visit, the president announced that he would remove U.S. tariffs and restrictions on whiskey in honor of the King and Queen. In a post on Truth Social, he said the King and Queen had managed to get him to do something nobody else had been able to do, adding that they did so almost without asking. That was an extraordinary statement, especially in the context of trade politics. Tariffs are usually discussed through negotiation, economic interests, industry pressure, and political strategy, but Trump framed the move as a personal tribute to the royal couple. That kind of language shows how much symbolic diplomacy can matter, particularly with a president who responds strongly to personal relationships, ceremony, and public respect. The whiskey decision was immediately seen as a win for Britain's spirits industry, particularly Scottish whiskey producers, who had been affected by trade tensions and tariffs. But in royal terms, it was also presented as a success for King Charles's soft power. The king did not need to make a loud political demand. The visit itself, the ceremony, the personal warmth, and the symbolism appeared to do much of the work. That is where the comparison with Queen Elizabeth becomes interesting. Trump's encounters with the late Queen helped define his relationship with the British monarchy during his first presidency. His recent engagement with King Charles now suggests that he continues to see the monarchy as something special and influential. Whether through admiration, nostalgia, or personal respect, Trump clearly responds to royal attention in a way that can have real diplomatic effects. For Britain, that matters. The monarchy does not set trade policy. It does not negotiate tariffs in the formal political sense. But royal visits can create atmosphere. They can improve personal relationships. They can soften disagreements. They can make political leaders more receptive to British interests. That has always been part of the monarchy's diplomatic value. Queen Elizabeth understood that better than almost anyone. Over her long reign, she met presidents, prime ministers, dictators, reformers, revolutionaries, and world leaders of every kind. Her power was not in public argument. It was in endurance, symbolism, and the ability to make people feel the weight of history when they stood beside her. Trump, whatever one thinks of him politically, appears to have understood that he was meeting someone unique. His joke about hoping he had not offended her may have sounded casual, but it also revealed awareness. Being the last state visitor received by Queen Elizabeth is not a small historical footnote. It places him in the final diplomatic chapter of one of the longest reigns in British history. For a president who cares deeply about legacy and imagery, that fact would not be lost on him. Robert Hardman's anecdote also gives royal watchers something rare, a small glimpse into how Trump processes his encounters with monarchy in private conversation. His blunt, "I've had better, and I've certainly had worse" line will likely be interpreted in different ways. Some will see it as disrespectfully casual. Others will see it as classic Trump humor. Some may even see it as oddly complimentary, because by saying he had certainly had worse, he was still placing the Queen among memorable and positive encounters. But the late Queen's reported impression of him is perhaps more revealing. If those close to her really described Trump as charming and amusing, that fits with what many royal insiders have said about Elizabeth's ability to separate personal manners from political controversy. The Queen met people from across the political spectrum and maintained a strict neutrality. Her job was not to approve or disapprove of Democratic leaders. Her job was to receive them, host them, and maintain relationships between nations. That neutrality was part of her genius. She could make a divisive president feel respected without appearing to endorse his politics. She could host a controversial figure while keeping the monarchy above the partisan fight. That is not easy, and it is one reason she remained such an effective global figure for so long. King Charles now faces the same challenge, but in a very different media environment. Every gesture is instantly analyzed. Every photograph becomes a headline. Every diplomatic courtesy is interpreted politically. Yet, the recent U.S. visit suggests Charles may also understand the power of royal warmth, especially with Trump. The president's whiskey tariff announcement shows that ceremony can still produce practical outcomes. That does not mean the monarchy is secretly running foreign policy. It is not. Elected governments make the decisions, but royal soft power creates openings. It gives politicians room to claim goodwill. It can turn a difficult negotiation into a friendly gesture. And in this case, Trump chose to present the tariff change as something the king and queen had inspired. That is why the story matters beyond one funny remark about Queen Elizabeth. It connects three different moments: Trump's meetings with the late queen in 2018 and 2019, his reflection on being her final UK state visitor, and his response to King Charles and Queen Camilla's recent visit. Together, they show the continuing role of monarchy in the relationship between Britain and the United States. For royal watchers, the Queen's final state visitors will always carry historical significance. Trump's place in that story is unusual, controversial, and undeniably memorable. He was not a conventional president, and his style often clashed with the quiet dignity associated with Elizabeth's reign. But the Queen had met enough world leaders to handle almost any personality. If she found him amusing, as Hardman suggests, then perhaps she saw him through the lens of someone who had spent decades observing the theater of power. That may be the key to understanding the exchange. Queen Elizabeth was not easily shocked. She had lived through war, abdication, political upheaval, family crises, and massive social change. By the time she met Trump, she had seen nearly every type of public figure imaginable. A loud, confident American president may have been unusual, but not beyond her experience. Trump, meanwhile, appears to have left the encounter with a sense of respect, even if expressed in his own blunt language. His recent comments about King Charles and Queen Camilla show that the royal connection remains meaningful to him. And his decision to link a trade move on whiskey to the royal visit gave the monarchy another moment of diplomatic relevance. In the end, the story is not just about whether Trump gave Queen Elizabeth a good review. It is about how monarchy continues to operate in the background of international relations. A joke in the Oval Office, a memory of a state visit, a tariff announcement in honor of the King and Queen, all of it points to the strange but lasting power of royal symbolism. Queen Elizabeth's reign is over, but the relationships she built still echo. King Charles is now carrying that role into a new era, dealing with leaders who admired his mother and are now forming impressions of him. Trump's latest remarks remind the world that even in an age of blunt politics and social media diplomacy, the monarchy still has a way of commanding attention. And perhaps that is why this small exchange has attracted so much interest. Donald Trump was told he was the last state visitor Queen Elizabeth received in Britain. He joked that he hoped he had not offended her. Then he gave his blunt verdict. It was short, sharp, and unmistakably his style. But beneath the humor was a reminder of something larger: Queen Elizabeth's final years, Trump's unusual place in royal history, and the continuing influence of the crown